Hi guys, good afternoon. It's G Economics here once again with a few thoughts on the Year 2 A-Level Paper 2. So that's A-Level Macro Paper. So before I get started, let me just say that if you want to contact me, obviously you can go to geconomics.co.uk/contact, Twitter, so that's G_Economics, Instagram, G_Economics also. So, I'm going to talk to you about the previous, obviously last year's paper was the very first A2 or Year 2 macro paper that has been in existence and sat by candidates. But there are also, on the OCR website, you will find a sample paper, and OCR also published 2 practice papers. So one of them published in April 2016, one of them published in December 2016. I will put a Dropbox link in the below to practice paper 1, practice paper 2, and the June 2017 script. At least if you haven't got access to those, because some of them are on OCR Interchange, you can have a look at them and just get a flavour and a feel for the papers. No doubt your teachers have given you them anyway. So what I will do is I will very quickly run through the contents, the key themes of the previous papers, and then we will try and consider and just have a few little thoughts about what might more likely than not appear on the exam in a few weeks' time. Of course, nota bene, ladies and gentlemen, this is not an exact science, and so I would never recommend that you simply focus upon the key topics I'm going to identify at the end of this video. Obviously, you need to know everything. Okay, so looking back to the sample paper on the OCR website, the case study was primarily all to do with US and UK monetary policy. The key themes which stemmed from that were the liquidity trap, the terms of trade, exchange rate, money supply, and the independent monetary policy. And let's look at practice paper 2. We'll look at the case studies and the key themes, and then we'll come back to the essays, I think. So practice paper 1, will China be more successful in the UK? So the key themes of that particular case study were all to do with income and wealth, budget deficits, output gaps, the multiplier K, and supply side policies and how that related to investment. Practice paper 2 was on the UK's twin deficits. Interesting that should appear, the UK's twin deficits. So that means a trade deficit and a budget deficit. So that was focusing primarily, as you would expect, therefore, fiscal policy, balance of payments, and then an evaluate question on flat rate taxes. And then the actual paper last year, interesting case study, was on this thing which they called lowflation, where the key themes were all to do, as you would expect, with monetary policy and inflation, difference between disinflation and deflation, quantitative easing, the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient, and asking you to interpret that, inflation, and then deflationary spiral. So rather than talking about, it was an interesting question, that particular question, because one would anticipate a question on wage price spiral maybe, but maybe not thinking about the reverse. So do think about, how could the exam board throw this question at me in another way, which might be slightly less obvious. And that one was certainly one of those particular questions. So you can see there we've got monetary policy, fiscal policy, stroke a little bit of supply side, and then back to monetary policy again. So we're covering most of the key themes there. Now, might it be, ladies and gentlemen, that the particular case study that you're going to get this time, might it be that it will focus maybe upon the notion of supply side policy, given that it hasn't been, whilst it's been on in minor aspects in some of the papers, might it be that that will be on, and also then linking into the whole notion of economic growth, because you can see, and if you can download this document, have a look at it, but when you have a look at it, you will see that the key macro objectives of inflation, trade, unemployment have generally been covered in the past, but not so much with regard to economic growth. So maybe that's something to think about and consider. The other interesting thing to consider, ladies and gentlemen, is that if monetary policy is covered in the case study, then generally speaking, you get an essay on fiscal policy. Or if fiscal policy is covered in the case study, you get an essay on monetary policy. So it's really important, isn't it, that you know your key policies, monetary, fiscal, supply side. Make sure that you know those areas of the specification, inside out, back to front, and make sure that you can have a stab at all of the evaluation questions on each of those policy instruments, because they are recurring themes, and obviously they're going to be recurring themes. That's just bound to be the case. Okay, let's now, ladies and gentlemen, take a look at the essays. So, sample paper, comparative advantage, and how that could possibly explain the trade between developed and developing nations. That was one. Evaluate the case for increasing the top rate of income tax. 2. Globalization and income inequality. 3. And then, should a central bank allow a retail bank to fail? I'm paraphrasing there, but that was mainly what the question was. My students, we've learned a lot about that in recent times with Lucy Armstrong's visit. So that was the 4 essay questions on the sample paper. Practice paper 1, economic performance of a country, country X, if it leaves the EU, so that was 1. Keynesian aggregate supply curve, or classical, which is the most useful for designing government policy, that was 2. 3 was quantity theory, money and inflation, and then 4 was pattern of employment and economic performance. Now, if you look in the specification, you'll see how these are just picked out and applied to the case study, these key statements. Practice paper 2, growth versus inflation, always a popular one that, if it does come up, it's a nice essay, that one. The base rate and the exchange rate, the link between the two, and hence the link into growth, etc., etc. The World Trade Organization and its role in economic development. And then finally, should the Bank of England set a growth target? Interesting question. That's one of those things that I'm saying to you, think of a less obvious question. So obviously we're all very familiar with, yes, the Bank of England's target for inflation is the symmetrical target 2.0, but sort of throwing in a little bit of a curved ball there, ladies and gentlemen. You need to be on your toes for that one. And then finally, essays on the last year's paper, where number 1 on full employment, something to do, I think it was evaluate the extent to which an economy benefits from full employment, something like that. Fiscal policy and negative output gaps, something to do with fiscal policy, how effective is it at reducing negative output gaps. Economic growth and poverty in developing nations, not my personal favourite, I must say, development economics, so one I'd be steering clear of. And then the final one on the economics of remittances, and obviously there's quite a significant amount you can write about that. It's a nice essay, that one. So that's in the past, ladies and gentlemen. What say the future? So I've already mentioned the case study, economic growth, supply side policies, that sort of thing. Having put this document together, I've been through the whole specification and ticked off all the areas which have been assessed within these papers, and that then leaves us with the following areas. Now I'm talking mainly, in the next few moments, we're focusing on potential essay topics, okay? So Phillips curve and the NIRU, the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. Be nice to see that one on, I think, if there's something on that. Supply side policies, hasn't really been a great deal about supply side policies at all, be that case study, data question or essay, so maybe that's something to consider in a bit more detail. The impact of multinational companies and corporations. Now let's say, for sake of argument, The case study theme is economic growth, and it's focusing on economic growth in emerging market economies. And you then think to yourself, oh well, multinational companies locating in these countries will be key in driving forward growth in those countries. So maybe that would tie together nicely, wouldn't it, on a paper? Now, I have no inside track on this, ladies and gents, so I'm just hypothesizing. But the impact of multinational companies, corporations, emerging economies, imbalances on the balance of payments, how sustainable is a deficit on the trade balance, what are the causes, consequences, implications of all of that to do with deficit on the balance of payments, the trade balance. Different exchange rate systems. Now, exchange rate has been on, as you've seen here, practice paper 2, but nothing really on maybe something to do with exchange rate mechanism 2, the euro, all that sort of thing, fixed exchange rates, floating exchange rates. You'd never know, you never know on that. And then obviously the last big one is the financial sector and regulation. So there's only been that one question at the very top of this: should a central bank or should the government allow a retail bank to fail? I hope a question like that does come on, because my students will be very well prepared for that one. But so we're talking the last 2 pages of the specification on governance and financial regulation. All of that is fair game, because there has been so little to date on anything to do with finance. And of course, finance, for those of you who are not aware, is the new addition, as it were, to this new A-level specification. So at some point, the assessment will have to get stuck into this new section. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that's been of at least a little bit of use for you, if nothing else, to see what's been on the papers in the past, and maybe to get the papers and the mark schemes. But as I say, if you've any questions, or maybe you've got a few predictions of your own and you think, hey Chico, you've missed this one, I'd love to hear from you, and do get in touch. So I hope the revision's going well. Bye for now.